Okay, so let's talk about quick hoops. And maybe you've never heard of a quick hoop before. So first question is, what is a quick hoop? And then what's the advantage of using a quick hoop? So first of all, with that first question, what is a quick hoop? A quick hoop basically is a very simple structure outside where you just form a hoop with a material like this plastic conduit pipe here. And you just form this hoop that you end up covering either with plastic or with a row cover, and your plants grow inside. So it's just this very miniature, just a very miniature hoop house, if you would. And the advantage of it, okay, the big advantage of it, really almost the only advantage of it, is that it's very inexpensive. It doesn't have a lot of capital that has to go into it. For instance, behind me here is a hoop house. And a hoop house like this one is about 30 by 50 feet, and that can cost upwards of $5,000 just to build a hoop house like that. Whereas putting up hoops like this over about the same space would be a 10th, maybe even a 20th of that cost. So you're talking about $250 to $500 to cover approximately about the same space, and I'm just throwing out numbers there. But that gives you a little ballpark of how this is a lot less expensive, but it does require a little bit more work when it comes down to the actual season, because you may need to end up uncovering them and covering them to allow for ventilation and other factors like that. Now, another thing is, you might be wondering, why can't I just take my row cover and just throw it over the plants? Why can't it just be a blanket that protects them? And with some vegetables, you can do that to a certain extent. Like here where we are in the Zone 7, we can pretty much do that with cabbage and Brussels sprouts. They're pretty hardy. They're on that really hardy list. And so we'll let them go for a long time without any cover. And then when it starts getting pretty cold, when it gets down into the low 20s, we'll go out there and just throw a row cover over them, and it adds just enough protection. But there's a value in having the extra airspace underneath. I'll try and get this where this doesn't flip out on me again. There's an added value in having that extra airspace to heat up, and it just acts like an insulator, keeping it warm inside there. All right, so let's get into some construction here, how we would set one of these up. I'm going to show you what I would consider one of the best ways for someone like yourself or just a simple home gardener to do this. There's many different materials you can use to create the hoops like this. There's fiberglass rods that people use and just poke into the ground on one side and then on the other. Also, you can use metal conduit pipe, but then you'll need to end up purchasing a bender, which can be really expensive as well. So what I suggest you start out using is a rigid PVC electrical conduit, and you want to make sure it's the electrical conduit that's gray and not white, because the white PVC pipe is going to end up breaking down in the sunlight. And you can put plastic over these or row covers, and if you use plastic on the white PVC, it can break down the plastic as well. So you want to use a gray rigid PVC electrical conduit pipe, and this is a 10 foot length, so that's one material you'll need. And then for the construction of them, you'll need a tape measure, you'll need a hammer here for hammering in these rebar pieces. We've got pieces of rebar that we put in, and I'll tell you why we use these. And then you'll need sandbags and the row cover itself to cover it in the end. So the construction of it, what you do is you set out your tape measure, measure along the area that you want to cover, and put these rebar posts in every 5 feet. So it's 5 feet between bows. And this will cover two 30-inch beds plus a 1 foot walkway. So that's basically 6 feet in between. So you'll measure that apart, 6 feet apart and 5 feet apart going down the bows. And then you'll come along and simply hammer in these rebar pieces. And you want to hammer them in, it's about 18 inches to 2 feet of rebar. And you want to put it into the ground until it's about 8 inches off of the ground. And you can use just a little piece of PVC pipe as a little measurer to do this. So just hammer it down to where the PVC pipe is. And what this is for is, of course, it gives something to put your PVC conduit onto. But another plus with this is that it forms a very nice structure, because as you place your PVC onto it, it keeps the edges of your structure going perpendicular to the ground. Whereas if you're using other materials, like if you were using a fiberglass and you were just poking it into the ground, it would end up coming out of the ground at an angle, and so you would have this hoop that was kind of angled going over instead of straight up and down on the sides. And so this ends up giving your plants near the edges more room to grow, and it's just maximizing that space inside. So it's, as you can see, it's very simple to set up here. And then once you have it set up, the next step is to get your row cover and put your row cover over it. A little tip with this is that we like to pull it tight from the ends first, and then come along and sandbag it on the sides. And these sandbags are super important, especially if you live in a place where it's windy. You know, here in Tennessee, we can get winds up to 50 miles per hour, and we pretty much need to use a sandbag on every bow of the quick hoop. Otherwise, the winds will just come off and blow the row covers away. So it's important to be able to get your row cover down tight and sandbag it down so that it stays. And then, you know, if it's a really hot day, you can come out and take the sandbags off and lift the row cover over, give it some ventilation. Or if you're coming to harvest, again, you just take the sandbags off, pull the row cover back, and you can harvest inside. And it makes for a great way that you can protect your veggies pretty simply, and for a pretty low cost when it comes down to it. You know, these these PVC conduit pipes are just, you know, $1.50 each or something like that. So it's a great way to do this. Now, another thing to note here is if you are living in an area where it's a lot colder and you're having to deal with working with a lot colder temperatures, something that you can do is well, first of all, you can use thicker row cover like we talked about earlier, but you're compromising there. Or you can double up your row covers. You can use 2 row covers. But if you do that, you may want to be a little more proactive to only put that double row cover on during the coldest seasons. In fact, this last winter we had some broccoli that we wanted to take just a little further, and so we decided to double row cover it. But just to do that on the nights when it was going to get really cold. So we went out and we'd pull over a second row cover, and it helped keep our broccoli a lot longer into the season. So that's something that you can do. Another thing is you can use plastic instead of the row cover, and it'll probably give you more protection in the end, but it will end up probably being a little bit more labor intensive as well, because you'll definitely, you know, it doesn't have the breathability of the row cover fabric, and so you'll definitely need to be coming in and pulling it back and letting it air out inside. So that's a quick overview of setting up quick hoops, which I would really highly suggest as one of the best ways that for a very low cost, you can add quite a bit of protection to your garden. Second here, if you want to step it up just a notch higher, I'm going to show you how you can set up something called a caterpillar tunnel. And a caterpillar tunnel is just like a quick hoop, but it's the next step up. It's something that you can actually walk into. And so I ended up setting up one of these with my brother-in-law, David, and it's really neat. It's really amazing. It's also pretty low cost. Again, comparing it to a hoop house like this, it's about 1/6 of the cost. So if you were going to cover about the same area as this hoop house, you know, 30 by 50 feet, it would run you around $750, $800, somewhere in that range, versus the $5,000. So that's another ballpark that you can just be playing around with in your mind. But the real neat thing about these is that you can actually walk into them. They're not quite as labor intensive uncovering and covering and uncovering and covering as the quick hoops are. So let me show you caterpillar tunnels.